With the 2023 NHL draft over, we can now look at who won and lost the 2023 NHL draft. But who got the best value and who had the best and worst picks? Well, make sure you watch till the end for every single pick reviewed, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new for more draft content just like this all throughout the year, all year long. You won't want to miss it. Now, we're going to not waste any time here and get into the fifth biggest winner of the 2023 NHL draft and go into the bigger winners and losers as we go. To start out here, I have the Carolina Hurricanes, who always seem to do very well in the draft and scout very well and draft very well. This one was no exception for them. And even though they didn't have a ton of high picks, they used every single one they had to maximum potential. First, they got Bradley Nadeau, who has an amazing shot and has done some incredible things in the BCHL. You can see 113 points this last year in 54 games. He's a player that has a lot of good tools. I think putting that together at pro level might be something of an issue, but I think in the Kane system, that's a perfect fit for him to go to. And I like the shot that he provides, and I like that goal scoring ability that could translate to the next level. Then at number 62, you got Felix Ungersorum, who is a really underrated prospect in this draft, in my opinion, at the junior 20 level, 46 points in 42 games, but he's in an interesting spot. He's really tools. He has some great hockey IQ. He's not the greatest skater, not the most physical player at all. He's 5'11", 172 pounds, but he's a player I think the Canes could really develop well and can give patience to as well. If he's able to take that next step into the SHL and really perform well there, then I think the sky's the limit for the type of tools that he has, especially that puck handling and the passing ability that he does have too. Then at number 39, I'm 34, you get Jayden Perron here at that spot, which is just glorious. I'm not as high on Perron as most people, but I still saw him as absolutely a player worth taking in that second round, and they get him in that third round, 94th overall, a fantastic pick. He's tinier at 5'8", 157 pounds, and again, improving on that, adding muscle will be huge for him, but the talent there is still undeniable. His deking, his puck handling is actually elite, and the way he uses his passing, the shot that he has too, the way he's able to create in the offensive zone, especially around the net, is fantastic, and his transition game is great too. He's a player I think the Canes will really appreciate, and again, another player, just like Felix, who will need some time, will need a lot of development, but I think could pan out in a really big way. Then you got some really interesting picks in Alexander Reinbacher at 100th overall. He didn't play much in the second half, but he's a player that was trending to be a first round pick until his apparent injury. He's a player that skates well and has just a good overall abilities. 5'11", 170 pounds, is decent physically though, can push play in a good way. He's a player that I think has a lot of potential, but we'll have to wait and see with Reinbacher especially, because I think he's a player that, just like a lot of these guys on this list for Carolina, will take a while to get to the next level. And then you got Tamir Murkanov, I think, especially if we're talking about the big home run picks for the Canes, 163rd overall here. This to me is a brilliant pick. I mean, I didn't have him in my top 55, but he was right outside of that. To me, the tools that Murkanov has is fantastic. The motor that he has, the handling he has, the skating that he has is all at a great level. He's a player that, yes, is smaller, just like Jayden Perron, 5'8", 170 pounds, but he's a player that if he adds more muscle, just like a lot of the rest of the prospects that Carolina has added today, that talent is awesome. He's a game breaker. He's a player that has so much vision for the ice. He's a guy that can sense so many things too. And that passing game, I think, is just going to be improving and improving as we see Murkanov hopefully take that next step in the KHL as well. He's a player though that if he pops, could be a solid middle six player for you. And for Carolina, you look at what they've done. This is just an impeccable class to have, potential-wise. Now, going from the fifth biggest winner to the fifth biggest loser, I want to say right before we get into the losers here that to me, none of these teams are humongous losers. These are just teams that I'm not quite as high on with the picks and not quite as high on with what they did on these two draft days, but I don't think these two teams are going to have horrible players, or none of these guys are going to make the NHL, because I think this draft, just like last year, was quite a bit balanced. I don't think there was any true horrible losers. In saying that though, for my fifth biggest loser, I have the Vancouver Canucks, and this one might be a little bit of a hot take, but I still had to go for it. Now, here's the thing. I do like Tom Willander, and even though I guess I was lower on him than most, having him more towards the back end of my first round, I do like the skating fundamentals, and I think he's going to be a smart player that it can be aggressive when he needs to and have solid physical traits at 6'1", 179 pounds, and I think he will be a solid middle pairing guy for the Canucks, which at number 11 is not an offensive pick by any means. And Hunter Brzustewicz as well at 75, I think is also pretty okay. 57 points in 68 games this last year in the OHL. Brzustewicz is a guy that I think is just fine in a lot of areas. His passing game is solid, though though his playmaking is solid though, but I don't really see him pushing the needle too much for the Canucks on the defensive end. But then you got players like Manio, and I just don't really love that pick all too much. Not the biggest fan of him. And players like Ty Mueller and Matthew Perkins as overagers is just really weird to me, especially considering it's those two players who I don't really have much stock in. And then you got Aiden Celebrini, which is maybe one of the funniest picks there, because I mean, for the Canucks, we'll see. Maybe they're able to win the draft lottery next year and get Macklin Celebrini, but that just seems like if we get Macklin Celebrini next year, it'll be perfect because we have Aiden Celebrini in the last year's draft, and that's kind of what it just seems to me as. It will be a draft that's still okay for them, and again, this is why I want to say that I don't think any of these teams are true losers, because I think this is still an okay draft, but compared to a lot of other teams, I don't think there was maximum value that could have been had here. Now going on to the four biggest winners of the 2023 draft, I have the Buffalo Sabres, who, yes, are absolutely carried in a lot of ways by that 13th overall pick, but the rest of the draft also wasn't too bad for them. But Zach Benson at 13 is marvelous. I had him 5th overall in my rankings. The fact that he drops to 13 is insane. One of the best defensive players, if not the best defensive player of this draft forward-wise. Such a beast, such a hard worker, and such an absolute dog out there. But his offensive skill set is fantastic too. One of the best passers as well, and one of the best visions of this draft. And to me, the Benson could be a first-line two-way guy that you would love to have on a Stanley Cup winning team. Then you got other players as well in the second round, which I think are pretty solid too. You got Anton Wahlberg, who at 39 overall, I think is pretty solid value there. Just a consistent, solid overall physical centerman who I think could be a great third-line center for them in the future. A guy that can pass well, a guy that can use his stick too, and he's a guy that's had some pretty good highlights as well, but he's a player that's already transitioned decently to the SHL and probably won't take too long to get to the NHL level. Then you got Maxim Strbak with the 45th overall pick. He's been playing in the USHL this last year. 6'2", 198 pounds as a D, and 18 points in 46 games in the USHL. But he's solid transitionally, one of the better defensive and physical defensemen of this draft. He's a guy that will just shut down play, will be able to play along the boards, get out of pressure. He's just a solid defensive guy who also has some pretty good transitional ability. And even though he's not the best skater, we'll see if that actually translates onto the pro level. I do like Strbak as possibly a bottom pair, 5th guy, and at a solid defensive physical skill set, which I think will lead to a lot of just quiet success in the next level. Then you got Gavin McCarthy, who's kind of up the same alley as well. He also played in the USHL this last year, and he's a player that I think also has some interesting skill to him. His transition game is also good. He's put up some good numbers there, but he's just a kind of fine player. There's nothing that's exceptional about him, and that skating can be a little bit worrisome, at least when it comes to the pure speed he has. But just like Strbak, I could see him becoming maybe a 6th guy for the Sabres and being on that bottom pair if it turns out well. And then you got a player like Scott Razlaf as well at the 141st overall pick, who I think was one of the more underrated goalies of this draft class with Seattle. A 918 save percentage there. Even if Seattle was stacked, I think Razlaf did a lot of great things there too. And overall, I think for the Sabres draft class, it was great. And they had some good solid value picks. Benson, especially though at 13th overall, makes their prospect pool that was already one of the best in the NHL even better. Then going on to the 4 biggest losers for the 2023 draft, and again, another team that I don't think really lost all that much, but I think I needed to include here, and that is the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, to me, again, there could be some interest here. Brayden Yager is in a unique position. He's a player I'm not too high on compared to, obviously, the Penguins and some other people, but there is some good shooting tendencies and some good puck handling. I just think, again, physically, there's a lot for him to go to adapt to the pro game, and I think there is some risk-taking that I don't quite love there, but Yager is a player that I think does have some good tools, but again, 14th overall, especially with some of the options the Penguins had, that would go just a few picks later. I just don't think Yager would have been my pick, especially at center. I mean, Oliver Moore would have been, to me, the perfect Pittsburgh Penguin. Yager is just kind of, I would think will be fine for them, honestly, as a middle 6 centerman. Emil Paniemi is in an interesting position, played pretty solidly this year in the U20 in the Finnish League, and he's a player that I think could maybe pan out as this physical 6 defenseman, but I think that's the most that he kind of gets to. He's good physically, but the rest of the product there I'm not in love with. He's an okay skater at best. The actual offensive skill and transitional ability is not really quite there. He's a player that maybe could be a physical 6 guy, but that's kind of the most I see out of him. And again, especially considering players like Jaden Perron and Evan Barkey were picked just a couple of picks later, is a little bit disappointing to me. Overall, the Penguins I think could have just done much better, especially with those two picks. Emil Järventie could be maybe a pretty solid 7th round pick. That's pretty good value there too. But besides that, I'm not loving what the Pittsburgh Penguins did, especially in an important draft for them where they missed the playoffs, and this is the best they got. A little bit disappointing in my opinion. Now going on to the third biggest winner of the 2023 draft, I have the San Jose Sharks. Now, I didn't really love their draft class last year, but they more than made up for it with this one. First, you got the 2 first-round picks in Will Smith and Quentin Musty. Smith at 4 makes sense, especially with the Sharks and their center needs. Smith is creative. He's a dual-threat offensive player, brings so much creativity and skill to the ice, and he's going to be a player that is exciting for San Jose for so long. You got Quentin Musty, who I absolutely love in every single way. He's a player that brings a lot of physicality, but also knows how to use his body in a great way, and he's a player that is a great puck handler, has fantastic offensive hockey sense. He's a player that isn't the most exciting skater, but I think he's a player that gets the job done, and just his overall offensive tool set with the size he brings, the potential is so enticing, and to me, I could absolutely see a situation where he is also a first-line caliber player. Then you go on to the second round, you get Kasper Holttunen, great physical and goal-scoring tool set. We'll see how the rest of the game adapts, but if he's able to maximize those two things at the next level, then I think it could really work out, but not where I would have picked him personally. Then in the third round, you got Brandon Savoda, who kind of like Holttunen brings a pretty good shooting and physical game to him, has a little bit of a lack of top-end skating and a little bit of clunkiness there, and that could really be the biggest thing that holds him back, but I do like the way he plays the game, and I do think he's a player that could be a pretty solid bottom 6 player, maybe a third liner at the next level. And then you got Luka Cagnoti in the 4th round, 123rd overall. That's just great value, man. I mean, he's a fantastic puck mover, fantastic skater, so smooth on his edge work there. He does get beat a lot with his size, and that physicality is just not there at all, and that will be something he needs to improve on if he's going to be a pro player. And there is a chance that it's a boom or bust type of pick, but if he does work out, he could be a really solid third defenseman, power play guy for you, and in the 4th round, you're taking that. Honestly, just the four rounds that they had there were amazing, and I think for San Jose, there's a lot of potential there in a lot of different styles of the game, and I do like the variety at which they picked as well. Now going on to my third biggest loser of the 2023 NHL draft, next up I have the Boston Bruins. This really shouldn't surprise anybody, besides really the Fabian Lysell pick. The Bruins have not had a lot of draft picks that I've loved over the past few years. You got, with a 92nd overall pick, Christopher Pelosi, which is just crazy to me, like genuinely crazy to me. He's a good physical player. I think he has some good two-way traits, but he really doesn't have much offensive potential at all. The best I think you really hope for is a 4th-line player, and even then, with the players they passed up on, again, like a Jaden Perron or Denver Barkey, it's just a really disappointing pick. Beckett Henriksen, I think, is a better pick there. 124th overall. I do like his physical play, and I do think there's some upside there with his passing game. But besides that, I don't think there's a whole lot there either. And again, I think he's another player that you hope for is maybe a pretty good 4th liner for you. Just not a lot of potential at all in this draft class for Boston. And yeah, there's nothing much else to say, really. Now going on to the second biggest winner of the 2023 NHL draft. Next up, I have the Columbus Blue Jackets. And what's to say about this draft that won't be said already? Look at what the Blue Jackets were able to do in terms of pure value. I mean, the first 4 rounds are practically as perfect as you could possibly ever hope if you were a Columbus Blue Jackets fan. Getting Adam Fantilli at 3rd overall, it might become one of the best 3rd overall picks in NHL history. I'm serious about how good that pick might be for them and how lucky it is for them too. Leo Carlsson would have been great for them. Fantilli is going to be a rock star for the Blue Jackets. Then you get Gavin Brindley, his UMich teammate, at 34th overall, and that is just as perfect as it comes. Brindley and Fantilli were dynamic together this last year, and even though he's smaller and can work on his physical play, he still has that nose for the net. He can still get in front and still work around, uses his skill set fantastically, and the pace at which he plays the game, the skills that he has is electric. He's a player that to me will be a top 15 player in this class as well, and getting him alongside Fantilli is a dream. Then you get William Whitelaw at 66th overall, going to the University of Wisconsin. Go Badgers. Whitelaw is in a unique position, a really creative, really big risk taker. He can make some baffling decisions, but he has some really good tools there, and if you can work around that and kind of fix the brain a little bit, you could have a electric player on your middle 6. Then you got in the 4th round, Andrew Strafman, just an efficient, versatile player in the USHL this last year. He's a guy that I could just see becoming a fine 5th or 4th defenseman there, but in the 4th round, I think that's pretty good value, honestly. And then you got Luca Pinelli, 114th overall, which is also one of the biggest steals of this draft. Pinelli, yes, is undersized, but he plays the game the right way for an undersized forward, still plays along the boards well, still gets pucks back, still plays a physical game, even if sometimes it can't work out for him. He's a player that, yes, will need to add some more muscle, and his skating can still go a little bit a ways, but still at the same time, the skill set he has, the vision he has, and the awareness he has, and the positioning he has is great. And he was a second round prospect, in my opinion, an early second round prospect. Getting him in the fourth round is magical. What a draft by Columbus. Now going on to the second biggest loser in the 2023 NHL draft, and again, I have to preface this, I don't think any teams are absolute losers, but I have the Toronto Maple Leafs. Again, in just terms of pure value, this was a draft that they didn't have many picks in, but I think they really should have. I think they really should have had more, just because of their prospect pool. It's not fantastic, especially with Matthew Nyes graduating, and I think they could have done a little bit more to also just trade within this draft and get a little bit more assets, especially in that third round and second round, but they didn't end up doing that. They just had their first, their fifth, and their sixth. Of course, with that 28th overall pick, they selected Easton Cowan. He has some good tenacity. I do like his playmaking skill set. I just don't really see a lot of potential there. Again, to me, the most he could become is a really solid, tenacious third line forward, and I think for some of the options they had available, especially Gavin Brindley, who went a few picks later, that to me is a disappointing pick. Hudson Malinsky, I mean, an overager in the AJHL. Okay, sure, why not? Noah Chadwick, I think, is actually okay in the sixth round. He's a fine defenseman, was fine for Lethbridge. Maybe he's able to become and translate that size into that next level at 6'4", but I wouldn't really hope for it too much. I think the most they get out of this is a solid third line energy guy, and for a draft that I think they needed to add some more prospects and some more high-end talent, I think it was a little bit disappointing in my opinion. But now before we go on to the biggest winner in this draft class, let's go on to the biggest loser. And to me, a lot of this just depends on the Ross Colton trade, in my opinion. A player that I think they both should have done so much to be able to keep. They, of course, traded him for the 37th overall pick and selected Yvan Gauthier. I don't like Yvan Gauthier that much. I like the skill, but translating that to the pro game is going to be a problem, in my opinion. But this is the Tampa Bay Lightning. This is the thing. I don't think any teams are absolute losers here. And yes, betting against the Tampa Bay Lightning development team is a bad thing to do. But I think, especially compared to some of the other drafts where they got players like Dylan Duke, I just don't really see where much of the potential is coming from here. Especially with Yvan Gauthier, which again has some good underlying skill, but I don't know if that'll be able to translate. We'll see what happens. But I think a lot of this is just a sour taste in my mouth that they traded Ross Colton and had to give him away, and only getting that second round pick back and getting a player like Yvan Gauthier. That definitely makes it a lot worse, in my opinion, for me, and makes Tampa a little bit of losers here, even if it was something that in some ways they needed to do, but again, I just hate to see them do it. Now going on to the biggest winners in the 2023 NHL draft, and there's no other time that I've hated saying this more in my entire life, but the Chicago Blackhawks are the biggest winners in the 2023 NHL draft. And you know, as a Stars fan, I can try to deny it. I can try to not give Chicago any credit, but it's impossible. Look at this. Connor Bedard, of course, first overall, of course. But Oliver Moore 19th is a steal in every sense of the word. And the skills that he has, the skating that he has, is all at a top end level. And if he can improve that consistency, then you have a player that will be an unreal second line center. Then you get Adam Guyon in the second round. I think that could turn out to be a really interesting pick there. Roman Kanstrov has some really good underrated skill, and even though he will be a project, he's a player that, if he does turn to the pro game, does get better in that aspect, could be a really exciting player. Martin Misiak at 55 overall. Fantastic pick. Love the physical tools. Love the way he plays the game. He's a guy that will have to be a little more consistent with how he processes the offensive level, but he's a player that I think could be a really good middle six player for you. And in that 55th overall pick, that's great. Nick Lardis at 67 is unreal as well. Has some fantastic goal scoring ability. He's a lot smaller, and I do have some trouble seeing how he translates that to the NHL and the AHL, but I think this is a player that if he is able to get to that pace of the NHL level, then I think he could become a really good goal scorer for you and a good power play player as well. And honestly, you just look at those picks and they're all great. They're all fantastic. The value they got was fantastic. And you look at what they came away with just the pure talent on all these different positions. And to me, there's just no way they aren't the biggest winner. It is Chicago, and it will be Chicago. That's gonna be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Comment down below. Who do you guys think are the biggest winners and the biggest losers of the 2023 NHL draft? And what would you categorize your team as? Were they a winner? Were they a loser? Let us know down below. And of course, share the video with all hockey fans you guys know online and click on this card for all my 2023 NHL draft content right in one playlist. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.